Where we're going to try to pick up again is looking at just the mechanics of elections. Yesterday we did a quick contrast between primaries and caucuses. Both are pre-election elections, yes? How we pick a party's nominee that will then run in the general election. So both parties will have, unless there's an incumbent, a number of nominees, and they're competing to be the nominee. How does a primary work versus a caucus? What's a primary? What does it look like physically? How do you decide that party's nominee? Jenny's close. What do you do?
It's like more democratic because people vote for the candidate of their party.
So when you say vote, what does that vote look like?
Like they go to one side.
Yeah. You go to a polling place. You get your ballot. You go in the little booth. You cast your ballot. So it's this anonymous system of voting. They call it the Australian ballot as well for that reason. I guess that's where it originated. And you said it was more democratic. How come?
Because it's not like a group of elite people.
So any party member, again, we're going to talk about open and closed and the kind of the rules. But assuming you're voting within a party, anyone within the party can vote. Do you have to be informed? No, that's really kind of what makes it democratic. But unfortunately, what makes something more democratic is, in some ways, what makes it easier to voice that opinion. What's a caucus? What is it there?
A meeting of the lead officials.
Well, typically, we think about within Congress, where they're picking, putting people on committees or choosing a party platform. We talk about those high officials, but in general, it's just a meeting of party members, right? So it's a meeting of party members. How does this work to choose a nominee?
They discuss and deliberate between the potential nominees.
Yeah, and then when you say vote, what do? I've had my discussion and say, okay, we're going to vote for a candidate. How do I show my support?
Go to a corner.
You literally go to a corner in some precincts, and you kind of stand and you do a head count. So based on that, what would we say this system is? If the primary system is more democratic, this is more informed, right? Unfortunately, the opposite of democratic seems to be informed. It's a little disconcerting, isn't it? So those are, in general, the two mechanisms we use to run our pre-election elections. But unfortunately, it gets a little more complicated than that. So what we discussed a little bit earlier, and here it now is in the notes, is that there are open and closed primaries, and then there's semi-closed primaries, and then there's blanket primaries. These are the major kind of classifications you need to know. I think open, closed, semi. But in a second, I'm going to show you a link, and it's Byzantine. It's these every state having their own little twist on it, and therefore coming up with a new vocabulary term for us. But these are the major ones I think we need to know. Open is exactly what it sounds like. It's open to all voters regardless of registration. So if you register Democrat, but you decide you want to vote in the Republican primary within your state, you can do so. What you can't do is then turn around and go vote in the Democratic primary as well. So you have to pick one of the two, but once you do, that's it. That's it for your votes. In some ways, in open, we could say is more democratic, but what danger it leads to is that idea of crossover voting or raiding. Remember, that's where you decide that rather than pick the best nominee for my party, I want to go sabotage the other party and pick the crackpot that they have to kind of do damage to them. And you might do it if your state isn't necessarily, you're a minority, you're part of a minority political party in a state that predominantly goes the other way, right? That might be a reason why you decide to do that. For that reason, they've also come up with a model of closed primaries, where you can only vote in the primary for the party that you've registered for. So if you've registered Democrat, you got to vote in their primary. A kind of a middle path, like I said, of those semi-closed primary systems. Massachusetts follows that role. So what we say is, if you registered, you have to go vote in that primary. But if you registered independent, you can choose. Right? That's how ours works. But to show you this link, what you see if you squint, I can blow it up, but is a listing of each state and what they do, what's unique to them. So, for example, Arizona uses a presidential preference system instead of the traditional primary system. Voters must be registered for a party in order to receive a ballot. So here you can't, be an independent or necessarily unaffiliated. You got to register for a party in order to get the ballot. California uses top two plan. Voters, what they did is they came up with a nonpartisan blanket party system in which all candidates are listed on the same primary ballot, and the top two recipients face off in the general election. Heck is a blanket primary, right? To that, you got to kind of drop out here, and essentially blanket means kind of, you're covering everything. I've got this blanketed. So instead of voting for, registering as a Republican and voting in the Republican primary, or registering as a Democrat and voting in the Democratic primary, what you get is, I guess, one big ballot. And you can kind of pick and choose regardless of party. Again, there's a ton of versions and variations in here, and I don't think our job is to know all of them. I think the key terminology for us is going to be open, closed, and semi. Blanket maybe is a possibility. There's other ones in there. I think the point is not to know every variation, but to know there are variations. Because again, these are national elections run in states to pick a party nominee and eventual office holder. And therefore, states have a say in this, and because of federalism, states have different rules, and the parties kind of weigh into that. Again, the party system is power is somewhat diffused within the states, so different parties within different states have a lot of say and have different ideas, and you get that mess.
So for the caucus, so a state, like any state could decide that's the way they want.
Kind of. They have to, like, the party has to decide to go along with it. And I think the party will look at it is this good for the party? Is this good for the electoral process? So you've got a good question in that when states try to kind of like change their electoral system, sometimes they bump up against the party. An example I'll give you in a second is when they try to push up their primary or caucus date because they want a little more attention. And the party often says, no, you can't do that because that kind of creates a mad rush for everybody to go early. It takes away the kind of deliberative nature of elections. We're kind of having just an election on one day instead of on multiple days. And they go back and forth, and literally sometimes they go to court over it. So if you wanted, long story short, if you wanted to change to a caucus system from a primary system, you would, one, have to, change your electoral laws. It involves legislation. And two, you'd have to get the party to go along with it.
What about like the public?
What is our say in it?
Yeah.
Honestly, most of that would be happening kind of over our heads, if you want to define it that way. But, you saw in California that there was an initiative that if voters got a petition signed and got it on the ballot, that'd be one way to do it. So you'd need to have this kind of, democratic movement for people to say, we want to change this, and you'd have to do it probably through a petition drive. Why are you thinking that? Is that
Well, just like, it seems like the people like in that state when they want to have the caucus, they don't have the decision of what.
what do you think the people would want more often than not?
I guess to let them handle it.
And probably easier, right? I don't know if people are informed enough to kind of understand that the different ways of voting matter, and they increase and decrease kind of turnout based on. So I think this is where party and states kind of have an advantage because we barely show up to the polls, let alone decide to get into that chart that I just showed you. But I like the idea of I think your question was driven on, shouldn't that be more important to us? And should we have more of a say in it? I like that's what I was struck by in your question. All right, to look at the caucus system again, we had mentioned it's because it involves discussion. It technically is the more informed approach, and therefore it's the one they use less often. you know, I referenced a chart that you guys can look at in your textbook that shows you like 3/4 of the states use the primary system, whereas, you know, a handful of states use the caucus system. Now, to make it even more complex, not only do the states have kind of variations on that primary or caucus system, again, like I said, the parties put their own spin in general, rule of thumb, the major difference between the two parties in terms of their pre-election elections is the Republicans more often use a winner-take-all primary system, and the Democrats make more use of what's known as a superdelegate. I think they have a cape and a uniform that goes with it, or at least an alias, right? The Republican Party uses, again, a winner-take-all system where, again, if you get a plurality within a particular state, you get all that state's delegates in that race to get the most delegates that will nominate you in the National Convention, right? So what does that do? Well, that kind of speeds the process, and that could be a good thing. Remember, picture what a primary is. It's a bunch of Republican and Democratic candidates beating up on each other. Is that healthy for the party? The answer is yes and no, right? Why would it be a bad thing to have people from the same party beating up on each other in a pre-election election? What do you think, Nick?
It like shows like the weakness for like that party.
Yeah, one thing, we're not unified as a party, right? And you know, elections are all about unifying a coalition. What else? What were you thinking, Alex?
It's a good thing. It creates dissonance and different opinions.
Good.
And sort of, and can maybe gather more people because of different.
So we're a democratic nation, and that depends on democratic debate, and that helps us to reach that truth and consensus, right? So maybe the discord is a kind of a good thing. I'll go even further. Not only does it strengthen, you know, maybe where they are ideologically, is it good for a candidate to have to go through that gauntlet, to have to go through a bruising kind of primary, where they get tested in terms of character and, you know, how they do in front of the camera and how they do in debates, right? Strengthens them, makes them, you know, they got to take on the, you know, the other side in a minute, so maybe it strengthens them. Give me another opposite, though, as they're doing this kind of bruising. You know, what wins elections? If we're being cynical.
Moderacy.
So one coming to the middle. And what's interesting, it is a great point. What's interesting is during the primaries, where do you think they go to try to win? Do they go to the middle? Do they go to the extremes? You know, I'm trying to win the Democrats. I've got to show you that I'm more liberal than this other individual, perhaps. Similarly with the Republicans, I got to show you I'm more conservative. Depends on what plays with each party. But what wins in a general election is, you know, capturing the moderates. So they go to the extremes in the primaries and then come back to the middle for the general election. And so a bruising primary may push you too far to the left or right. What else wins elections? Again, if we're being cynical.
Campaign funds.
Yeah, money. So a bruising primary, what does that do? With regards to your financial wherewithal. Do you have to spend in the primaries? Do you have limited funds? All right. So, long story short, you know, the idea is maybe it's good to speed it, but you want to contrast it with, like, you know, losing the idea of, you know, arriving at a better platform, strengthening your candidate through, you know, the kind of hard work of the primary. There's pros and cons to it, but what this does, like I said, is get them quicker to a nominee so they can then turn the table or turn the page and begin to concentrate on the general elections. What it also does is kind of a byproduct is just like in the electoral system, in the general elections, it makes certain states maybe have, maybe they receive more attention because they have a bigger delegate count, and they're more up for grabs. They're kind of, you know, swing states in that sense. When you look at the Democratic Party, they use what I've referred to as superdelegates. And, you know, in every other instance, when you have your pre-election election, you're nominating delegates who, again, it's similar to the Electoral College. These are, you know, loyal party members who are active within the party, and, you know, the election is about kind of electing them. They get to go to the national convention and cast the official vote, but they are pre-committed, right? So, for example, if Jeb Bush runs and he wins a particular state in their primary, those delegates are pre-committed to him. Superdelegates are not committed. They are, the Democratic Party has 796 superdelegates. And what they are is they come from different states, but they are notable party officials, governors, representatives, people that work within the party, and they're not pre-committed. So, what's the philosophy here? I'm making it less democratic, and therefore, because they're not elected, I'm making it less democratic and therefore more informed, right? So, here was 2008, where again within the Democratic primary, Obama was largely being contested by Hillary Clinton, and you can kind of see that the New York Times began to poll the superdelegates and find out where they stood politically. They're not committed, but if they had made up their mind, they told the New York Times, and they had 115 that were still kind of making up their mind. They might do it in the convention. They might have been a swing, kind of vote, because this race was pretty close. But you can see that there's representatives, and I think here's a party official, here's a governor, and this was their statement as to who they're supporting and why. All right. So just to make the process more complicated, I've got primaries and caucuses, I've got open primaries and closed primaries and blanket primaries and semi-closed primaries, and then the parties throw in wrinkles with superdelegates and winner-take-all kind of system. Again, all this is to get you to the convention. There's a national nominating convention, and I'll do more on it later, and there those delegates essentially make the nominee of their party official. So it's kind of an anointing process. Instead of our magic number with the Electoral College, 5. How many do you need? Or how many are there total electoral votes? We're going to get to that electoral system again. 538, right? And you need how many out of that? 270. Here it's just a different math. I don't think you have to know those numbers. I can't remember. If I turn around, I know one's 2,000 something and one's 1,000, but I can't remember beyond that. That's kind of small, but what you see is smaller. Whose head is floating over there. What you can kind of see is, the delegate counts on a state-by-state basis. This one is a little more interesting because, I've got this is how many I need, this is the race. Again, winner-take-all system, not universally used in each state, so you're going to kind of see it down there, but that winner-take-all system sped the arrival at that presumptive nominee, whereas there was a very big potential that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were going to go into the convention without a clear front-runner, and the superdelegates might have swung it, or certain states that had stepped up their primaries in spite of the parties not wanting them to, would be a deciding factor. And that was significant because the parties were saying, we're not counting your delegates. You went too soon. You didn't do it with our permission. We're not counting your delegates. I think it was Florida and Michigan. All right? So the Democrats had a much more kind of murky picture for a while before their presumptive nominee stepped forward. Here you see it a little quicker. And what you see is, again, kind of variation state by state. In terms of, did the entire delegation go to, in that case, Romney, or did we split the delegates? Again, each state had a little variation. All right, so to look at this a little more, again, we're looking to, award those delegates and get to that kind of magic number and verify it at the convention. There's problems with that, and the test loves to ask you about, ways to kind of criticize things. So, for example, I should hide this. Do you guys know who's the first state to have a primary versus the first state to have a caucus? I'll let you think while I change my battery life here again. I thought I already changed that. Hello, Decca. Guesses?
I feel like caucus is Connecticut.
So, because it's got a little bit of alliteration there. Not a bad guess. Not a bad guess. All right, I'll have to reveal it. New Hampshire is the first one to have the primary. New Hampshire has the first primary. Iowa has the first caucus. So it's the New Hampshire primaries and the Iowa caucus. Now, something ought to strike you about both of these states. They go first. Anything strike you about them? What do you think when you think of New Hampshire? I got you on recording here, but what do you think?
Rural.
So, is that typical? Are they typical states? Are they a nice kind of demographic representation of the rest of the United States? I'm picking on New Hampshire too. How typical is New Hampshire? Right? It's fairly atypical, isn't it? You know, live free or die state, and we're going to speed that along by riding without helmets and allowing fireworks and tattoos and no sales tax and is it diverse? It's pretty white, right? What you got white people, granite, and trees up there. What else you got? It is not, particularly diverse. And so one of the criticisms is, I was curious to see if you know, because a lot of people do know, these two races kind of establish the front runner in some ways. The one that immediately gets all the media attention. Hey, they won. They're the front runner. Now let's focus on them and eat them alive. And if they, survive that, they might win the next race. Front runner status can be good. It can be bad, right? It can be good in that you gain momentum and you get more attention. It can be bad. You get more attention. And everybody begins to define their candidacy by beating up on you. So, at any rate, sometimes there's criticism by having these states that go first be fairly atypical states that don't represent the general public, but yet establish on some level a front runner. Because of all the attention, again, I'll stress this, and hopefully enough that it makes sense. There's going to be a lot of criticism of our electoral system, but one of the strengths is states definitely have a role. Because I have to kind of, win electoral votes by accumulating those votes state by state by state, you do have a strategy. I'm going to go to large states. I'm going to go to swing states. I might ignore states that are locked up one way or another, but I can't ignore states' issue. I can't run this generic national campaign. If I'm going to Iowa, I may be talking about ethanol subsidies. I might be talking about, you've got a lot of agriculture there. You would grow corn. We want to make sure that it stays a viable industry, and what kind of can we use, corn for besides food? Can we make it into, some sort of gasoline byproduct that runs cars? I got to talk about that, even though a lot of scientists say that that's not, maybe the most sensible thing to do, economically or from a sustainable kind of standpoint. So at any rate, I got to talk about each state's issues, right? For that reason, every state wants, kind of the spotlight, and they all push to kind of, be first. It's called front loading, where states really kind of begin to say, okay, when you ask, can't we change what we're doing? Well, some states tried to do that. So again, let me blow it up a little bit. But this was in 2008, where you had 19 states kind of just go rogue. And they all threatened to say, we're going earlier. I don't care what the party says, we're going to go earlier. And if they had done so, out of these 19, if 10 of them, which, were comprised of the largest states within our union, had moved their primaries up, more than half the American population would have voted before the other half did. And we probably would have had a presumptive nominee, meaning that other half would say, why bother? You keep having questions in one of those practice exams about, and it was hard to pronounce, wasn't it? Political efficacy. We wanted to say efficacy or something like that, right? The word effective is in there. Sometimes people kind of look at, do I believe in my institutions? Do I believe in my ability to influence those institutions? Does my vote matter? Well, this would have done terrible things to people's sense of political efficacy, right? So what do the parties do? Well, you can see in this article, in the following election cycle, the party pushed back, all right? So all these defiant states, I like the article, defiant states, try to leap over each other to have earlier primaries and caucuses, and it all threatened to kind of disintegrate. So consequently, there was a move by both parties to push back in this election, and they did it again. Who's in charge? It's an election for a national office as run in the states by the parties. So who's in charge? Well, what the parties could do is say, it's our nominee, it's our rules. We're going to change the rules and give you some incentives and disincentives to kind of stay where you're at. So, like, for example, this talks about the Democratic Party dangling more superdelegates. Hey, if you keep it where it's at, I'll throw you 10 more superdelegates. The Republican Party talked about, I'm going to make, you stay where you're at, but we're going to go winner-take-all system to make your votes count a little bit more. Okay? So, at any rate, an interesting kind of back and forth on that phenomenon known as front-loading. Okay, if I can't, necessarily go earlier, maybe what we can do is we can cluster our votes. There's also a move to make votes more meaningful by having regional primaries, by kind of saying, let's have a group of southern states go all together. Let's do a block of New England states all together. That practice started in 1988 with an event that was known as Super Tuesday. Again, I don't know if it was as exciting as it is super. That sounds pretty exciting. You guys don't look too excited about Super Tuesday. Aren't you excited about Super Tuesday? What it was an effort to maximize Southern votes by clustering 14 Southern states together and having them go all on the same day. Now, again, this kind of becomes unraveled because, over the years, Super Tuesday just simply meant regional primaries. There was a phenomenon of states kind of going regional primaries. And because the parties kind of had a say as to who went and who didn't, the numbers and who went kind of changed. So, for example, in 2008, you're going to see 24 states went at the same time. Again, that may have been too much. Too much of the nation kind of going on one day, taking away the deliberative nature of primaries. We want that candidate on some level to go through the grind because, I don't want it to be an easy primary and then discover that, geez, there's a scandal that I didn't know about this person. And I wish I knew that prior to the general election. Or, geez, this guy doesn't do well in front of the camera. Or, geez, this guy doesn't have an answer for the following question. You want it to be deliberative so you can really vet a candidate. So for that reason, again, states pushed back and they shrunk Super Tuesday. Does that look super? Looks kind of anemic in comparison. And is there any kind of regional logic to that? No. So there goes the kind of the beauty of the Super Tuesday, regional primary of those southern states. The reason that map may have looked that way too is because, yeah, it would be nice if the southern states voted as a block, but is that healthy for us as a nation? How would you feel if, I don't know, southern states are kind of dictating issues and, framing things up around geography there? Do northern states all of a sudden take umbrage? Do we take offense? Does it create sectionalism? Does it create that kind of regional tensions where we don't see ourselves as a nation? So that kind of explains maybe some of the fragmentation that goes on. And you certainly don't save any money with going all at once that way because the stakes are higher, the spending becomes higher. All right, so I got you to the point where we talked about winning the delegates, and we looked at the phenomenon of who goes first and how states want to front load and do these regional primaries. But having now kind of dealt with some of the reform issues, let's talk about, okay, the delegates are, in place, and they're going to go to the convention and cast that official ballot. What does the convention look like, and what's its purpose? If we kind of already know the numbers, you saw that map, and there was Mitt Romney, the presumptive nominee. Why have a convention? Well, one, it's a party. It's kind of nice, There's music and there's, events and things like that. But really, what a convention is all about is getting this convention bump. This is a chance to spotlight your candidate, to spotlight your party, to spotlight the platform. It's covered by the media. There's a lot of spectacle to it, and you come out of the convention with a bump. You look at where the candidate is in the polls prior to the convention. You look at them where they are afterwards. After every superstar of the party has gotten a chance to talk about this person and tell you what's great about the party and what's great about the candidate. And they come out with higher numbers. Again, historically, it used to be a real kind of, nitty-gritty affair where people went in uncommitted and there was a lot of kind of, deals and, argument and maneuvering. And now it's, like I said, more of this kind of, event to unify the party faithful, to get that platform out and to get public attention. Nick asked if there was going to be a movie today, and I just have clips. So this one was kind of, I just found it amusing because it gives you a little snapshot of what a convention looks like by a guy who DJ'd the convention. DJ Cassidy is his handle. He's mixing. I mean, look at the crowd and all the big screen, and they're rocking. That's my jam, by the way. Shaka Khan.
Clearly they haven't heard about DJ Teddy.
He almost came in here and mixed it up for us. Look at it. So what I have next, and hopefully no bias or kind of thinking did I alternate parties, and I didn't. I just kind of went with the first clip I could find. But I wanted to show you it from like the other end.
What's a mom like me doing in a place like this? I'm not even a political person, but what I am is a military
my sound and
mom.
my picture's not mine. You're still running. You're still running. Who's
My
talking here? I want to see
husband and
this.
I are so proud of our 5 kids. One each in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines.
I don't know who you are. Who are you? That's not Michelle Obama. Who is it? I don't know who that is. All right. So anyway, there's all kinds of speeches, and sometimes by the unknown. I guess that's a nice little teachable moment. This is by unknown. But really, what I wanted to show you was, my gosh, look at the crowd. They filled a stadium. They got signs, hats. Wait till you see the hats. All kinds of big screen stuff. Now, she's not a candidate at this point. Again, she's just a notable. They can't dance. I was trying to find like bad dancing at conventions, and I couldn't find a YouTube that did that. But they all try to dance to like Fleetwood Mac and other songs that aren't, cool and keen anymore. Not you. I got one. I'm going to sit to do this. The people that go to conventions are typically a little more fluent, obviously a little more partisan, not your typical person, a little atypical, like New Hampshire. Right? They like hats. Hats are a great way to show your kind of political affiliation, and certainly buttons along with it. So,
Oh no.
anybody guess? Tea bags, tea party.
Yeah.
So she is, you know, crazy for the Republican, Democrat. I don't know.
Decca
Democrat?
Mickey Mouse ears.
Little hat, sometimes big hat. Sometimes he's got bunting as a tie.
Yeah.
This guy I just like because he looks a little confused. This was a great moment in the convention. They have notable people speaking. That's Clint Eastwood, and he was talking to an empty chair as a metaphor for where are you, Mr. President? Why have you done these? You know, why haven't you done more about this, that, and the other thing? And if this guy directs something or acts in something, I'm seeing it. I don't care. He's phenomenal. It was not a great speech necessarily for him, but it was a notable moment. Get your nails did. Lots of buttons, lots of kind of patriotic kind of things. You match shirts.
Yeah.
Then you dance badly to Fleetwood Mac, and it looks even worse because you're all matching. Cowboy hats. Lots of matching. Showing unity, right? So things that show patriotism, things that show unity. And I love the expressions. I mean, this guy is in it. She's, you know, this is, you know, people won, you know, the Patriots won the Super Bowl, and some people didn't get that excited. Look at that person yelling. I skipped one. This guy. They are just in it. Oh, I blew it. Same thing. The crowd surf.
Wow. Wow.
Oh.
What?
It looks like him, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard to tell, yeah.
This guy was not into the crowd surfing. I think I just threw him in there because he looks like, you know, I want to go back to the days where we made the deal in the back room and I got to smoke that cigar. All right, I thought that'd be fun just to see, you know, I can't find the bad dancing, but I thought that'd be kind of fun for you guys to look at. That's it for fun today, by the way. All right, so from here, knowing that we go into the convention, we want to talk about the next swing, which is into the general elections. And when we swing into the general elections, you know, Alex, you had pointed it out earlier about going to the edges and then coming to the center, right? This is where that shift happens. The electorate is different in the general elections. So during the primaries, they're going to go to those ideological extremes. You know, for example, right now, what's playing somewhat well within the Democratic Party is a coming back to that position of a hawk. Does anybody know what that means? If you're hawkish, it's a predatory bird, right? It's one that is perhaps aggressive. So if someone's a war hawk, they're different than the dove, who's, you know, more about, you know, peace, I suppose. So the idea of, okay, ISIS is a threat, we want boots on the ground, that issue is playing a little bit better within the Republican Party. They had to, you know, with Iraq and Afghanistan and the cost of the war and the economic downturn, there was a little bit of shying away from that. And now that issue is, you know, maybe becoming a more of a resurgent issue that you see the Republican candidates positioning themselves on. What happens in the general election, they might come back to a more moderate, you know, position about we're only going to go in places when it's within our own national interest and it doesn't involve boots on the ground. Okay? So, one, the electorate is different. Two, the opponents certainly are different. What you have to do in a primary is distinguish yourself among like-minded, perhaps, candidates, which again involves maybe saying, I'm more extreme. No, I am. What you have to do in the general elections is, again, you know, you've got two. It's interesting to watch the debates. They'll kind of, you know, how do you stand on education? And both candidates will say, I'm for education. You're like, oh, good. You guys are all for education. That's a positive. You're basically not only taking moderate positions, but less defined positions. You're trying to establish electability, and you're trying not to mess up too. So the more I give you is the more fodder for the other party. What's beautiful often is, what's your economic plan? Well, it's all detailed in my website, and you can go there and look at it. Anybody going to go there and look at it? And they might have some sort of detailed budget analysis that's, just overwhelming, and then you don't really look at it unless you're a member of the press, and you might dissect it. So it, again, there's going to be a different tone when we go into the general elections. Funding and media attention obviously increases. I've got now the two front runners, and interest groups, any group that's interested in the election begins to pour funding into it, right? As we go into the general elections. Now, we did the math already, right? So this is really familiar to you guys, and we hopefully can go kind of fast, and I'll get to my break here in a little second. In the general elections, again, we're competing for those 538 electoral votes based on our representative model. You have 435 representatives. So states have electors based on population, but you also have 100 senators. So states have electors based on statehood. And so the number of electors is somewhat commensurate to your representation within Congress, the standing within Congress. So there is a bit of science that way. We throw in 3 for the District of Columbia. We award the majority of these electoral votes on a winner-take-all basis. Most people think they're mad that you're voting for electors and you're not voting directly for the president, and therefore it's not democratic. But as I indicated in the past, these electors are essentially pre-committed. There has only been a handful of faithless electors, rogue electors that voted differently than directed. Once the party system kicked in, parties controlled who were going to be these delegates, and they don't pick anybody that's not zealous and faithful, right? So it's pretty much a rubber stamp. Where the numbers get skewed is in that winner-take-all system. I win with a majority and I get 100% of the electoral votes. Or if there's a third-party candidate, I win with a plurality and I get 100% of the electoral votes. I win with 40% of the votes, but I get 100% of California's, I think, 55 electoral votes, right? So that definitely kind of, will skew the system in that race to 270, and that's why people get upset. It creates that possibility that we'll talk about of winning the election in terms of, let's say, an electoral vote, but, let's do it the other way. Winning the election in terms of popular vote, but losing it in terms of the electoral vote. And again, how does that happen? I have to win, remember how many states? We talked about you need to win a handful of big states by a little margin.
11.
Yeah, it's just a combination. It's like 7 and then some sort of combination of others. But if I can win an election by stringing together the right 11 states, and if I win by a razor-thin margin there, my opponent's popular count is pretty much equal to mine, but I've got all the electoral votes, and then I lose those other states in a landslide, and his popular vote goes way up, but I'm still winning the election because I got those key electoral votes, right? So the idea behind this was to create these rational, well-informed electors who in turn, made a more intelligent choice for president, given the stakes. That singular office is one that we're most afraid of. What happens is parties come along, they begin to control the nomination process, it's a rubber stamp, and then that electoral system kind of skews the electoral results, right? As a reminder, I have in here, and I don't think we have to really go over it, some of the other issues of reform, like when we didn't have a specification as to party, and Adams and Jefferson get put together, or I didn't have a specification with regards to president, vice president, and I have this, virtual tie, this essentially a tie between Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr. Where do we go for ties? Who gets to break that?
House of Representatives.
The House of Reps, right? Remember back to the corrupt bargain and how many ballots in this case, it took them 38 ballots to break the election of 1900 with the corrupt bargain, they traded it away supposedly. They traded their votes. So there's a number of reform issues that we could look at with regards to the Electoral College. And that's kind of what we swing into next. One of the main problems with the Electoral College is not only does it skew kind of the electoral outcome, it skews how people campaign. Like we talked about, ideally within this system, states have a voice. That's the good thing about it. People talk about, I want to get rid of the Electoral College. Okay. If you do so, what you miss is the idea that in the federal model, states are a check on the national government. And this is one of the ways they're a check. As I had said earlier, candidates have to go to states and talk about those states' issues. If you went to a popular vote, then we're looking at different demographics, right? Who makes up the majority of the population? White Protestants. Do I play to that issue now? Women outnumber men by a small percentage. Do I use that as a demographic issue? Am I talking about state issues anymore? Or am I looking at more kind of demographics and taking on that strategy through a national campaign, right? So it's, ideally giving states a voice in the process, and that's what's good. But some states seem to have more votes and more say. California, for example, big states. I said 55, it's 54, all right? I'm going to go to big states because they have more electoral votes, and I'm going to stand to gain them in that winner-take-all system. What we miss sometimes, too, is that every state does matter. There is a whole electoral plan that people have, and it may involve those 3 electoral votes from Montana or, the Dakotas. Those 3 are part of the critical strategy. So I don't ignore states. Even states I have locked up, my opponent may be going to that state, and there may be this kind of strategy of if I go there, he has to go there, and I'm going to drain resources, and maybe I make some headway on some issues. Maybe I just get some media attention. So you go to every state, even the ones that are locked up, but you tend to go to and spend more of your limited resources on the big states and the swing states in particular. These battleground states, the ones that are considered competitive, that could go either way and therefore decide an election. And as a result, those constituencies within the states get even more attention. So I'm going to go to Michigan, a battleground state, and I'm going to appeal directly to union workers because that was for a while a manufacturing site, and now it's part of the Rust Belt. And what am I going to do to invigorate jobs and make sure that we get economic revival here? So do those individuals get more attention as a result, right? That's a criticism. Consequently, again, we look to criticize. We're often talking about, geez, I'd love to get rid of it. I don't like that certain states have more votes. I don't like the fact that it's indirect. I don't like the fact that there's potential of faithless electors. And mostly, I don't like the idea that you can win the popular vote and lose the election. And there are my examples of instances where it's happened. A huge problem with it too is that it like I said, it skews how we campaign, and it's going to weaken third-party candidates. I'm going to do a little bit more on that in a moment about the role of third-party candidates. What I want you guys to see, and I'm going to kind of speed ahead, is again, when we look at the alternatives, they're not much better. But here's my transition, I guess. Let me do this from here. There's all kinds of criticism of the system. And again, what I'll point out is some of the other models don't work much better. We got a little more work to get there to kind of understand, all the criticisms. But once we've laid it out, I want you guys to understand that if this is our system, there's a math and a science to it, and it leads to a whole other avenue of questions about, well, how do I take advantage of this system? So this is a cool kind of graphic that shows you at this point in time during the election where states were, certain states were locked up according to polling, and we had toss-up states, these swing states that could possibly go in one direction or another. And so what's interesting is, all right, what's my electoral strategy as a result to get to that 270? What it looked like is, okay, based on those undecided states, if I kind of swing the ones that look like, you know, they were leaning, it leaves these states. If I play up this issue, and this is what it's kind of reading about here, if I kind of play up this issue, it goes here. I play up this issue and, you know, I capture these states, it goes here. And so there's this kind of great interactive map where you begin to kind of strategize how to swing these bubbles. I'm going to have you guys kind of start some of that work. You know, swinging those bubbles, and I'll show you another way, depends on knowing demographics. So here's my way to give you kind of a brief breather. Decca will be back.